Many couples get stuck in what I call the explosion-shutdown cycle in their relationship. If every hard conversation in your relationship ends the same way, one of you explodes, the other shuts down, you're not just dealing with a communication flaw, you're dealing with a nervous system problem. It usually looks something like this. One person raises an issue, the other feels criticized, voices rise, both get defensive, someone gets louder, someone gets quieter, one explodes, one shuts down. And nothing gets resolved. Both people feel alone. And if it keeps happening, it just leads to more and more resentment and more fear about going into a hard conversation. That fear leads to postponing it. And then once things come up, there's a lot more energy behind it and a lot more anger and built up resentment. What's fundamentally happening is you have two nervous systems colliding. When we feel emotionally threatened, our bodies react automatically. The amygdala activates, your heart rate increases, muscles tense, the logical part of your brain goes offline. You're not just discussing a topic, you're trying to protect yourself. And one partner will tend to protect by fighting, the other one protects by fleeing. Obviously, you can have two partners do the same pattern, both fight or both flee, but it's very common for one to lean toward fighting and one to lean toward fleeing. Now, oftentimes, couples will describe this to me as person one is too emotional and person two is too cold. The problem is really that neither of you feels genuinely safe to be vulnerable. Sometimes that lack of safety is because of the relationship dynamic. Sometimes the problem is entirely internal and based off their own trauma, baggage, or preconceptions about what it means to be a man or what it means to be a woman, etc. So the first thing to do is to recognize this pattern. Once you do, you're able to take a step back and ask yourself a very simple question. Am I triggered while entering into this conversation? Because if you are, you have the choice, as crazy as it sounds, to not initiate a conversation while in a triggered state. That sounds really simple, but most couples do the opposite. They don't talk about the dynamics of their relationship when things are good or neutral. They wait until they're already charged and then enter the conversation, basically just guaranteeing that it will escalate. So if your heart is pounding or your jaw is tight or you're clenching your fists, you feel this urge to prove your point and make sure they know they're wrong, pause. And you can say out loud to them if the conversation's starting to be broached or just inside your own head, I want to talk about this, but I need 10 minutes to calm down so I don't make it worse. That's not avoiding the problem. If you say that you need a day or 2 days and that's always what you do, that might be avoiding the problem. But focusing on feeling calm within your own body before you speak is the kind of thing to do for yourself and for your partner. Another crucial thing to do is to change the entry point. Most fights are doomed within the first 30 seconds. If you start the fight with, you always, you never, why can't you, you're already setting them up to feel defensive. One thing you can do, especially when there is safety in that moment and you're not both coming at it from a highly triggered state, leading with vulnerability invites them to be vulnerable as well. So instead of saying, you never care about me, try, I've been feeling disconnected lately and it scares me. Or instead of, you never help, try saying something like, I've been overwhelmed and because our relationship obviously isn't at its best right now, I really struggle with knowing how to ask for support without turning it into a fight or an accusation. But I still am feeling overwhelmed and kind of alone right now. Some people make a habit of attacking people constantly and wondering why everyone around them is so defensive. Other people make a habit of being vulnerable and find that the people around them pretty frequently open up. This doesn't mean you have to water down your truth. It just means expressing the underlying fear beneath the frustration instead of just the frustration. One mental frame that you can have is most of the time there are the hard emotions, things like anger and outbursts and rage. There's usually softer emotions underneath those, things like fear, shame, loneliness, insecurity. When possible, try to find some of the softer emotions to express. That doesn't mean there's never a time for anger, but if that's the constant emotional note that's being rung over and over again, things aren't going to work out. Another piece of advice is avoid the shutdown. When you're mid cycle, one partner is starting to explode, the other one is starting to shut down, the natural instinct is to just push things. The louder one gets louder, the quieter one gets quieter, and the cycle just continues. So instead of yelling at them, for example, if they're shutting down, try saying something along the lines of, I can see that you're overwhelmed. I don't want to attack you. I want us to understand each other, and I want to feel understood. Lowering your tone, slowing your pace, reducing the intensity, that invites re-engagement. It's kind of like you're saying, hey, let's give this a second shot here. On the other hand, if you're the one who's getting quieter, taking a step back and being willing to up your intensity a bit to say what you need. So instead of just completely shutting down, saying something along the lines of, hey, I appreciate the fact that you really want to work on this. I'm feeling very overwhelmed by this conversation. I'm happy to stay engaged, but we need to meet somewhere in the middle here. Or I need some time for us to both calm down. Another tip is to focus on one issue at a time. Emotional blowups often happen because the conversation becomes a litany of history rather than focusing on the issue at hand. So do your best to stay present. Don't stack grievances. Don't pull in past arguments. Don't widen the scope. Pick one issue and stay with it. The goal is not to win, but to see eye to eye at least a little bit more than you were before. And commit to resolving that issue before moving on. When you flood a conversation with multiple complaints and bring up past arguments, the other person will feel attacked. And they'll feel attacked in a global or universal sense, where they're just you're being attacked as a person instead of a behavior being addressed. Being specific about the behavior makes it feel less like it's about them as a whole and more about something that's fixable and changeable. Now, of course, this can get complicated because sometimes there are patterns and they'll say, this is just a one-off thing. You don't need to worry about it, but maybe there has been a history. That in that type of situation, you can talk about the history a little bit to establish your main point, but bring it back to the main point. And then couples who really take this to the next level in terms of quickly being able to get themselves out of these patterns, learn how to think at a higher level. First, they stop seeing each other as the enemy, and they see that the cycle itself and the patterns they get caught in are the enemy. The explosion and shutdown pattern is damaging the relationship, not just the original topic. And so they learn how to think at that higher level of how do we avoid this higher level pattern? Instead of just saying things like, you're too reactive or you're emotionally unavailable, they begin to say things like, we get stuck in this loop a lot, don't we? How can we interrupt this pattern together? And they start to frame things and ask questions from the perspective of being teammates instead of opponents. Remember this, hard conversations will never destroy a relationship. Unregulated conversations destroy relationships all the time. You should be able to talk about money, sex, resentment, disappointment, and fear without it turning into emotional chaos. If every difficult topic becomes a battlefield, the issue isn't the topic. It's safety, it's regulation, it's unresolved trauma, and you can't argue your way into closeness. You have to regulate your way into it. And what becomes tricky, again, is sometimes that trauma and unresolved issues lie almost exclusively within the individual. It's random stuff from childhood, it's stuff from their past that need to be resolved. And sometimes it's about the relationship itself. Oftentimes it's a mix. And so people need to be committed to their own healing, and they also need to be committed to working on the relationship.